The trade deal between the U.S. and China, struck in October, took effect this week. Will the trade truce hold? Joining me to discuss all of this, author and foreign policy expert Gordon Chang. Gordon, thanks for being here. The Wall Street Journal reported on Monday that China plans to ease the flow of rare earths and other restricted materials to the U.S. via a system that will exclude companies with ties to the U.S. military, while fast-tracking export approvals for other firms. What do we know about this move, and how is the Trump administration responding?
We don't know very much beyond what was reported in the Journal. There have been a number of rumors to that effect. The Trump administration hasn't responded at all. We know that there are various versions of what President Trump and President Xi Jinping agreed to on October 30, but none of those versions would permit what you talked about, which is the exclusion of sales to defense-related contractors. So this appears to be a violation of that agreement. Now, also, we're seeing problems with China's purchases of soybeans. There apparently were agreements as to how much the Chinese would be buying, and it does not appear that they will meet their commitments for this year. So we have problems across the board with that agreement.
How have the U.S.'s use of tariffs under Trump actually protected U.S. security and gotten the Chinese to the table? I know the Supreme Court's reviewing whether he has the constitutional authority to actually enact these tariffs on his own.
Yeah, well, certainly it was the tariffs that got the Chinese to talk. So, for instance, the 20% additional tariff on fentanyl is, I think, the only reason why they had those discussions with both President Trump and FBI Director Kash Patel. And clearly the Chinese, I think, responded to all sorts of trade barriers that President Trump had put into place. Now, unfortunately, we're seeing those barriers being taken down before the Chinese comply with their agreements, and this is not good for the United States. We've gone through this before. As a matter of fact, President Trump went through this before. He had the January 2020 Phase 1 trade deal, which the Chinese violated almost immediately after it was inked. The Chinese are doing the same thing now, and so this doesn't look good. That's not to say that things are going to go bad, but it is to say that the first indications are that the Chinese are again dishonoring a trade pact with the United States.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the de facto position of the Chinese. They agree to something and then violate it before the signatures dry. I mean, it's pretty typical. You recently reported and shared on social media that a source in Korea informed you that China's trying to get the Korean government to censor speech. How is China attempting this, Gordon?
Well, Lee Jae-myung, the new president of South Korea, is very pro-China. And we know that the Chinese diplomats have actually talked to Yi's government publicly and privately and said that they felt that these statements have been made, anti-CCP statements, as they're called, are outside the bounds of free speech in Korea. And the Korean government agrees. So it didn't take very much for China to persuade Lee Jae-myung to try to stop anti-China, quote unquote, conversations. This means basically the end of free speech in South Korea. This is at the same time, Raymond, that Yi is attacking other democratic institutions. He's jailing pastors. He's jailing political opponents. This looks like a slide not only to authoritarianism, but it could very well be a slide to full totalitarianism, because we know that many of Yi's closest advisors are basically communists.
Well, former South Korean President Yoon was removed from office in April. He's now detained while awaiting trial for his failed attempt to impose martial law. Gordon, I guess my question is, what's the latest on that situation, and why is it critical for Yoon to be released?
Well, Yoon was, first of all, not only removed as president, he was also charged with insurrection, which is the only crime that he could be charged with. Or it was one of two crimes. And then on Monday, he was charged with the other crime, which was aiding the enemy. Also this week, police officers, about 100 of them, armed with search and arrest warrants, took into custody the former prime minister of South Korea. So this looks like a full-scale assault on opposition figures. And really what this means is that Yoon is being held on bogus charges. He's probably going to die in jail or die in custody because he's been denied medical care. So this is inhumane treatment. This is an attempt to kill opposition members.
Wow. In an interview with Fox News with my colleague Laura Ingraham this week, President Trump doubled down on his plan to allow 600,000 Chinese student visas despite backlash. Gordon, we've talked about the potential harm of this before. Why is the president so determined, do you think, to allow these 600,000 individuals, which could very well be spies for China, or a portion of them could be, into the United States?
Well, now you're really trying to get me angry, Raymond, if I have to answer that question. I don't know what's in President Trump's mind. He actually said, this is good for our economy. This is good for the schools involved. Yes, but he didn't talk about two things. One of them, of course, is that every place that is taken by a Chinese student, or Indian student for that matter, is one fewer place for an American. And we know that the Chinese are disproportionately taking STEM seats: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, which means that we're not teaching our kids in the skills that are necessary for the 21st century. We also know that the Chinese have these networks of consular officials and Ministry of State security agents that monitor, coerce, and surveil Chinese students. And they do that to force Chinese students to commit espionage, as well as to try to get the Chinese students to intimidate other students into not exercising their First Amendment rights. So this is a very bad story. The president is 100% wrong. And we saw Laura Ingraham in that extraordinary interview. She didn't even let Trump speak. She was so angry. And you never really see that anywhere, especially not from a conservative leaning anchor. But she's absolutely right. She's a hero, Raymond. She's a hero.
Yeah, well, that interview was filled with sparks. Sparks were flying, something else. China has the largest and longest distance fishing fleet in the world, Gordon. Another area where we see them intruding into international waters, something like almost 1,500 vessels. My question is, your thoughts on the overfishing in these international waters. I'm told by people this is happening in Alaska. How are they using this fishing fleet to exert dominance in these international waters?
China has over 500,000 of these fishing vessels. And
500,000?
These are over 500,000. And they engage in IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. And they do it against the United States in Alaskan waters, as you just mentioned. And they do it against other countries, many other countries. Argentina is now the big issue. But it's, Raymond, it's not just in international waters. They have a right to be there. They have a right to fish those waters. They don't have a right to fish in the exclusive economic zones of other countries. That's the band of water between 200 nautical miles and 12 nautical miles from a shoreline. The Chinese fish EEZ waters. They have no right to do that. And in Argentina, where there's the most recent sighting of the Chinese fishing fleets, the U.S. Coast Guard actually cooperates and works with the Argentinian Coast Guard to protect Argentinian waters. But we know that there have been incidents in the past. The Indonesians have actually seized and sunk Chinese fishing vessels. And that has worked a little bit to prevent the Chinese from intruding on Indonesia's waters.
A Chinese envoy made a barely veiled beheading threat against Japan's new Prime Minister, Takaichi, this past week. In a now-deleted post, the envoy from Beijing called for the new PM's death. Your reaction to this, Gordon? What's happening here? Why would they do such a thing?
Well, Takaichi before that said that if China were to invade Taiwan, Japan would have to mobilize, which of course is common sense. And the Chinese didn't like that. And so we had the Osaka General Council threaten to behead her. But we've got to remember that this General Council also threatened to cut off the head of Pete Hegseth. So this is conduct which the international community has tolerated. And because it's tolerated, the Chinese felt that they could continue with this. But we have seen from other Chinese diplomats comments that are basically in the same vein. And so we have got to stop treating China as a legitimate state. That's a long conversation, but we know that China will do whatever we permit it to do. So yes, they are the villains, but we've permitted them to be villains. And this is on us as well as them.
Gordon, a few weeks ago, there was a horrific stabbing on a train in the UK, resulting in at least 10 people injured. And the perpetrator was linked to additional knife attacks before these train stabbings. Now, I know these things are occurring throughout the UK on individuals. What is driving these attacks? And what about terror cells? Not only there, but here in the homeland.
Well, we know that there are terror cells in the homeland, to take your last point. You know, some people say that they're in every zip code. I'm not sure that's the case, but nonetheless, we know that they are large and well organized. And in some places, such as in San Francisco and in New York, they are above ground. And they're also above ground on some of our campuses. So this is really serious. We know that there have been dangerous elements coming across both the northern and southern borders. We've got to be extremely concerned. This has occurred at the same time that there's been an increase in the tempo of incursions by Chinese nationals into our military bases, also illegal surveillance of those bases by Chinese nationals. We found that secret Chinese biological weapons lab in Reedley, California, that alert building inspector in December 2022. Inside, they had at least 20 pathogens, some of them for fatal diseases, as well as almost 1,000 mice genetically engineered to spread disease. Wow. We know that they're here, and we also know that both the Biden and Trump administrations have not worked with the vigor necessary to take them apart. You know, if I can just go on for one more second.
Sure.
You know, I love Tom Holman, but, you know, he needs to devote ICE agents to breaking up the Chinese networks, not going after the people in the Home Depot parking lots. Yes, nobody who is illegal should remain in the U.S., but there needs to be a priority. We need to start taking out those who mean to kill Americans. Those who mean to improve your kitchen, yeah, they got to go, but they're not the priority.
Socialist candidate Zohran Mamdani won the election of New York mayor last week. His win was acclaimed by the Muslim community as well as progressive Democrats. How does China see the Mamdani win, do you think, Gordon?
Well, China financed it. We know that through a number of different channels, especially through the Communist Party's United Front Work Department, they've been funneling money to Mamdani's campaign and to the campaign of other leftists. And we also know that China has been fomenting violence on American streets. And here again, we know about this, Raymond. We don't take adequate measures to stop it. This is our country. If we lose it, it's going to be our fault. So I can't stress enough. This is a bipartisan failure. Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives have all failed to protect the United States against a known danger. We are repeating the same dynamic that was in the 1990s with regard to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. We know how that one turned out. So we have no excuse. We've got no excuse for not dealing with this. And Americans should be outraged at the Chinese, but they should also be outraged at the people that they elected to protect them, who are not protecting them.
Gordon, we will leave it there. For all the latest reports and analysis from Gordon Chang, you can follow him on X at Gordon G. Chang. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, Raymond.